Welcome to Playing the Culture Game, a series where, together with a very special guest, we'll dive deep into people and culture topics, all whilst playing a game. And today's very special guest is a very good friend of mine, Chris Davenport, or as I like to call him, Davo. Now, Davo's been working in the HR and talent space for the last decade or so, and now works at Udemy, the world's largest online learning marketplace. And here, he works with organizations to solve business challenges through learning. And the topic for today is all about building a learning culture. And Davo and I will dive deep into this topic, all whilst playing some poker. Hey, Davo, how are you?
I'm good, thanks. Thanks for having me. Thrilled to be here.
Right. Thanks so much for coming on. This is going to be a lot of fun. Hopefully I get to beat you at poker in front of everyone. That would be great, and it's all recorded. That's my aim.
That part will be less thrilling for me.
Great to have you on board. We'll kick things off. I'm just interested in... what's been a personal highlight for you this week? Last couple of weeks.
Personal highlight for me this week is not getting sick. So I've got a 10-month-year-old that has started daycare fairly recently, and we've continually been ill, picking up germs. But this week has been the first week of daycare where neither me or my partner have managed to get any germs. So that's a success.
Oh, amazing. You've germ dodged your way successfully over the last couple of weeks. It's a bit of a minefield. We've still got one in daycare, one at school, but it's it can be quite disruptive. All those little germs getting into the house.
That's it.
And you're at Udemy. I'm keen to learn about the last Udemy course you've taken. What was the last one you actually jumped on and done yourself?
Yeah, it wasn't one that was particularly work related, actually. It's the one that I jump back to quite frequently, and it relates to the charity actually that I'm donating to. So it's a dog training video. So we've got a puppy, and she's not a puppy anymore, but she sometimes forgets her training. And the number one tip there is that it's not the dog that needs training; it's the human that needs reminding how to train. So I often do go back to that one, and I went back to that course not too long ago to do some training.
Amazing. There's probably some lessons in that I'm sure we'll tap into throughout today's chat around the different contexts and who needs training and why they need training. So I'm looking forward to exploring that a little bit more. You sound like you've jumped into that one a few times, but is there a particular favorite Udemy course you've undertaken? So is there one you've done which you got, that was just an absolute cracker?
Yeah, so there's one, I'm going to have to get the name of the instructor for you, but he does sales negotiation course. And one of my favorite, I'll get the name for you, but one of my favorite concepts that he talks about is the power of silence. So I don't know, I'm quite an extrovert, and I like to chat and keep the conversation rolling. One of the most powerful things you can do in any negotiation is actually not talk. So present the idea that you're talking about, and then give space to the other person to think, digest, and then respond. It's a powerful negotiation tool as well. So that's my favorite course. I'll need to get the name of it for you, but I'll dig it up as we're chatting.
Yeah, do be really curious to learn more about who the person is that does that course and what the title is. Awesome. Great. So before we jump into the poker and explain the kind of poker aspect, I'm also going to fire through a random question at you using one of the games, one of my favorite games, is Quinks. I say it's one of my favorites. I'm quite biased because I developed it. So. But what I'll do is I'll pop this up and it will generate a random question, and you can either answer that question or you can ask for a redraw and you'll get another question. So don't feel forced to answer whatever comes on the screen. So I'll just share my screen and that should pop up the cards for us in a second. And then what I'll do is I'll click on draw cards and you'll see the question come up. And your potential question for today is... what has surprised you in a positive way in the context of career, work, and professional development?
Something that surprised me, I think, more than I was expecting. And look, this isn't super recent anymore. It's probably over the last couple of years. But as you may know about me, I like to be around people. I get energy from being around people. So the switch to remote working, or predominantly remote working, was something I wasn't too excited about, let's say. But there have been quite a lot of positive aspects that have come out of that. As I mentioned earlier, I've got a fairly young family, so there was the benefit of spending time with my son Frankie in the early phases, still in the early phases. But also, I found out I was actually a little bit more productive in work, not all those distractions around me. So, not that I'd ever want to maintain a completely remote work life, but it's certainly some unpredicted benefits to that transition.
Yeah, nice. A really nice example there of something that's been a surprising thing, but still positive. You've mentioned actually a couple of times already that you've got an extroverted nature and you get a lot of energy from people. So how do you balance that with now kind of working remotely? How do you still get the energy from people whilst maybe being a little bit further removed, at least in the kind of work sense?
Yeah, look, I mean, I probably annoy my partner a little bit too much over lunch breaks. But look, it's all about, for me, kind of picking my times and getting in front of I guess, sort of my customer base, and my work colleagues when I can now. So previously, obviously that was a challenge, but now we're in a space where really I can kind of own the amount of time that I'm out there speaking with customers that I'm working with my colleagues. I can book kind of time in the office whenever I want to. So really, kind of the power's with me at the moment, and I feel like I've now got a good sense of the right balance. I can own that.
That's awesome. That's again great insight there as well, in terms of just you feel like you've got a bit more agency and control over when you connect with people, how you connect with them, and you can just tweak it till you feel like the balance is right for you and you feel like empowered to do that. That's great. Awesome. Well, what we'll do now is we'll jump into the poker. For those of you in the audience that have not played poker before, pretty simple game on the surface. The aim is going to be basically to win as many chips as possible. So the person with the most chips at the end of our chat will be the winner. You can win chips by building a hand and getting your opponent to give you chips with a weaker hand. Or the fun part about poker is bluffing your opponent when you've actually got a weaker hand. You're making them think you've got a stronger hand and you get their chips. So there's a lot of fun ways to kind of play around with that concept, but that's the surface level aspect of the game. We're going to play for a little while. We're going to talk about building a learning culture whilst we play. And the little twist we're going to have is that we're going to donate some money to charity. So we'll donate depending on who wins. If I end up winning, we'll donate $75 to Davo's charity of choosing. But if Davo wins, we'll double the payment and make it $150 to Davo's charity of choosing. So before we jump into the poker, Davo, you've had a bit of a think about who you want to donate to. So do you mind sharing what proceed we're going to be donating money to, irrespective of who wins today?
Perfect. Yeah, no, absolutely. I need to remember the one that I chose, actually. So I think it's Victorian Dog Foundation. So there's a story behind this one. When we were getting our dog, Brittany, my partner was in charge of naming conventions. We sort of had a debate around whether we should get a rescue or whether we wanted a puppy. And anyway, the cuteness of the puppy prospect did win. But something that I've done on the birthday of Brittany each year, and something that I continue to do with opportunities like this to donate, is to put donations towards dog shelters. So I feel like I'm trying to balance the
decision you made.
Exactly. Is it balance or is it trying to justify? You pick.
I'll go with balance. Let's take the positive outlook. That's great. That's a lovely story as well. You kind of compensating for that decision you made. And look, hopefully many poker games we play together, we can keep building that fund that goes towards the rescue dogs. Super. I will share my screen and we'll get the poker rolling now. Are you ready to roll?
I'm ready to roll.
Great. So hopefully in a second, the table will be there. I'll deal the cards and we'll kickstart our conversation as well. So this will be a good test of both our multitasking skills. Great. And I'm just going to turn the volume down on those chips because they were crazy loud. Awesome. So we're talking about building a learning culture. And I guess the first question, I think, to kick things off and create some context here is, why is this more important now than ever before? So what makes this something we should be paying more attention to? Because there's obviously a bunch of stuff that organizations and businesses should be focusing on, could be focusing on. We've got a whole bunch of stuff happening. So what makes this something that should be prioritized above other things?
Yeah, I mean, great question to start with, and there's so many answers I think there. So I'll probably pull out a couple, and we can kind of see where we go from there. But first of all, I think you've got to think about how quickly the world is changing, right? So there's this sort of increasing nature of new skills required, particularly in things like technology and digital skills. But that's not to say that is entirely limited to those skills. It could be, suddenly everybody that was a manager needed to know how to manage remote teams, right? So the world's changing, and this kind of a need for skills more and more. And then there's this sort of reduction in the shelf life of skills that we're seeing as well. So if we're not investing in sort of ongoing learning and development as organizations, we're sort of going backwards, and you've got that compounding effect that's occurring as well. So that's kind of one. I guess for me, the other is that it's really hard to hang on to talent at the moment, and learning and development is obviously one of your weapons in your arsenal to kind of hang on to top talent and retain those.
Really interesting. So I'll dive deeper a little bit into that first reason you mentioned, because I think that ties into a little bit about longevity of an organization. And if we don't invest, then we've probably potentially got a short shelf life. Do you see any challenges here in terms of, like, we talk about things like innovation as all being really important to make sure businesses are continuously innovating so they stay ahead, so they don't fall behind. But then I think there's sometimes pressures around the short term and delivering short term results. So this whole aspect of learning, reskilling, continuously building, we know that takes a little bit of time. How do you position it to businesses that go, we want quick wins? So we want quick wins. You're talking about something that is, part of this is a long-term picture. We're building skills. How do you reconcile the two things there to, like, hey, we want to be turning around, making profits every quarter? How do we balance this? The investment in learning versus that?
Yeah. Totally. No, it's a good question. I mean, obviously context is everything here. I didn't have to show my hand. There you go. Sorry.
It's good for the
context
audience.
is everything here. So when we're talking about quick wins, you can certainly get quick wins out of learning. It really depends on sort of reframing the problem. I was chatting to a customer not too long ago, and their kind of key problem was that their staff were overworked, and it was like basically like a tech consulting firm. A lot of what they were doing is basically had kind of a backlog of customer tickets. And they said, look, learning is just not the priority right now. We need to, kind of knock over these tickets in order to, kind of essentially keep our revenue stream running. But then if you dig a little bit deeper, it's okay, well, what's causing the backlog? Is it that we don't have enough staff, or the staff don't actually have the skills that they need in order to, kind of quickly resolve the challenges? And obviously, the reason I'm giving this example is because it boiled down to the fact that actually the skills that they needed, particularly it was cloud-based applications, there was only a few within the team that could actually handle certain requests. So it was around building that kind of knowledge across the broader team, and that's quick win. So that's kind of solving an immediate kind of short-term business front of mind business priority. But of course, not all examples are going to be that relevant. But I think it's just around understanding the context and really sort of digging deeper.
No, I really like that example, because it's like, let's focus the learning in the initial instance around something that's going to solve an actual business problem that you've got right now. As you mentioned, if you kind of upskill more people, it makes the business more resilient to people. We know right now people are falling sick and whatever else a lot more frequently. This gives us a little bit more buffer and capacity to tackle those challenges. So I guess related to that, this is definitely something I see a lot, is what are some of your tips to help organizations then? Let's say there is a lot of business as usual operational activity, is busy because we've got staffing challenges, recruitment challenges. How do we carve out the time and space for learning in that kind of environment?
It's people often come and sort of say, what's your kind of number one tip almost for building a learning culture? And I always say, well, what's the number one kind of barrier to doing that? And you've absolutely kind of highlighted it there, which is time. Everyone's busy.
Mm.
How do we carve out the time for learning? So there's no silver bullet with this thing. I think it really comes down to a couple of strategies that you can put in place. For me, I mean, when I think about how Udemy operates internally, right? So how do we build that learning culture? Because we've got to do that first before we can, we've got to drink that Kool-Aid, so to speak, before we
Practice
can start serve it out to others. So we do a couple of things, and they're just small, kind of quick win strategies that I'd start with. And first of all is it's got to be top down driven, right? So you've got to have buy-in at the senior level, and they've got to kind of make that a kind of agenda from an operational perspective. And then there's around carving out the time in people's diaries for them. So we do something called Deal Hour, which is an acronym. It's drop everything and learn. And it's 1 hour in the diary each month. And you can't do anything else but learn. You're not allowed to. It doesn't have to be a Udemy course. It can be anything that's for your kind of personal or professional development. But then the time's there for you, and it's kind of built into the operating rhythm. The other thing you can then do, kind of build on top of that, is I guess that's operationally how you can put the time in the diary or advocate for it. But it's also around.
Davo, sorry, do you mind if I jump in with this? Because I like this concept of this deal hour. It sounds like everyone does it. What happens if someone doesn't do it? Because I guess again, these things we could say, let's put this hour in. Let's say you don't spend time learning. What's the
Yeah, you're sacked, and then you have to go. No, so look, we're really about driving the right behaviors and rewarding the right behaviors. There's no stick, I suppose, in this example. So when the deal hour starts, we've got a Slack channel that is kind of like, think of it like a book club. Everyone's kind of posting the courses that they're spending their time learning, or the podcasts that they're going to, or we had a couple of the team. For the most recent one that we're heading to a conference, and they were kind of using that deal hour as kind of their talking point. But anyway, people are sharing what they're learning, what they're doing. So you're somewhat accountable, I suppose, to being involved, and no one's going to call you out if you're not posting there or not silent. But I suppose that's sort of driving the right behavior. And then coming on to what I was saying, which is kind of building on this, actually, is we do learn our spotlights. So it might be at the end of the deal hour, the top, someone will be recognized for being a top learner of that week. So, we can track top learners, and they can get, various different awards and win prizes, etc. But just having a spotlight on those that are driving those right behaviors.
I love it. Two great examples there. Firstly, kind of creating that excitement and energy around the hour where people sharing what they're focusing on. Love the sound of that. And then this spotlighting piece of people that are really practicing what you preach. That's really great. So how do you determine then if someone gets spotlighted? What are some of the things that go into that?
So the spotlight is usually focused on someone who's one of the top 10 learners in each region. So that does look at, obviously, Udemy content as the first easy data point that we can pull out. But we kind of use that in conjunction, or the team that leads this uses that in conjunction with other learning that we're tracking through things like the deal hour, etc. And then a cool thing that we do for the spotlight, which comes on to the question around how do you make time, is we do like a day in the life of graph. I'll need to share it with you, which showed where this person spent their time learning. And it could be, let's say it was Chris. He listened to a podcast on XYZ on his morning walk with his dog. All right, and these are the things that he got out of it. He then did a coding challenge to improve his skills on Python. In a hackathon or a small mini hackathon with his colleagues during this particular time of day. So it's almost just highlighting where learning can fit around somebody's day-to-day operating rhythm.
That's really neat, and I think again moves this more towards the modern learning framework, which doesn't need to be these kind of 2-3 day courses. Actually, you can weave it into your everyday life, and again, it sounds like you do such a good job of living and breathing it at Udemy. That's amazing. So it does lead me on to the next piece, which I think is quite, so you've framed up quite nicely that it sounds like as an organization, you're doing a lot of things to kind of role model and advocate for learning. In terms of then, maybe some of the organizations you've worked with or some of the things you see in terms of this ownership piece around learning as well. So who owns the piece around, I should be learning and developing as an individual? Should we as an organization be saying you need to be doing the learning and development? Who kind of owns it? Who drives it? What's your view on that?
Yeah, I'd probably say it actually isn't quite as black and white. It's probably somewhere between sort of 50-50, really. You're kind of talking the difference between push and pull when it comes to learning. And there is obviously going to be some learning that is more pushed out, right? And that could be for compliance reasons, or it could be a bit more strategic where there is, certain capabilities that the organization needs to drive in order to be successful, moving forward, right? So there is some kind of push, and probably 50% push, I would say. But also part of building that kind of learning culture is around the pull piece. So what the ownership should sit at least to roughly 50%, I'm kind of saying, should sit with the employer as well to kind of pull out what they need to learn, and also, what will keep them developing personally as well. It doesn't always have to be about learning something that they're going to apply immediately within their role.
Terrific. And it seems like a common theme here. It's not about, I guess, the stick. You said the stick before. It's not about the stick. It's not about driving that. It's actually about, it sounds like a lot about creating the right environment where learning can thrive and flourish. And that is then a 50-50 equation. Part of it is the organization creating the right conditions and then the individuals responding. Picking up on that last point you mentioned there is that learning doesn't need to be about on the job. And I guess, again, I can imagine this is a bit of a mindset shift for some people going, but surely what's the ROI for me in people spending work time building their skills in other things? Like I can imagine that's an area of pushback for some people. So what would be your thoughts to that kind of thinking?
Yeah, I look, again, it's probably, setting the right tone in terms of what learning is for, and it's not just about ticking a box and doing this piece of compliance, but it's around empowering the individual to develop themselves. And I'll give you a good example. When we went into, I think it was lockdown 1 or 2, one of those early ones. Just a quick side note that I'm thrashing you at poker.
I know. I'm trying not to talk about poker at all because I haven't even won a hand yet. You're 7-zip on me.
Must be easier answering questions and playing poker than asking questions and playing poker.
I'd like to say that. Let's go with that. That's why I'm losing at the moment. We've still got time.
Yeah, we've got plenty of time. Yeah, so I was going to give you an example of some more of kind of, I guess, personal development that we certainly saw. I'm not here just to talk about Udemy, obviously, but it's easy to kind of give examples here. So when we first went into, I think it was lockdown 1 or 2, we capture kind of all kinds of data in terms of what courses and types of content is trending at any given time, within geographical locations. And the number 1 and 2 is really interesting. Number 2 is more interesting, but number 1 course that was trending was around stress management. So you think about how important that is for you, as an employee, sure, but more personally, and how you deal with kind of the stress of kind of everyday life, or in that instance, the kind of, I guess, changing nature of what was occurring in people's day-to-day lives. And then the second, which is, probably less interesting, but just more amusing, was a course called Working at Home with Kids During a Pandemic.
That's super fascinating.
I'm sure you know a bit about that.
The juggle, that was, yeah, it was real. So interesting. So there were the 2 top popular topics, interesting topics emerging from the data you got.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I mean, it makes sense, right? But those are the top trending courses for that specific period of time. I think it was probably sort of the first couple of months when we're moving into one. I think it was the first lockdown.
And then ultimately, those things, if we kind of zoom out, if an individual has got those challenges, they're working through them, and it's helping them with those personal situation, that's going to have a flow-on impact to their ability to work effectively, enjoy their work, get meaning from their work, if they've got that side balanced out.
Yeah, and that's it. And I think it's coming back to, I guess, your kind of question around people seeing it as not something as something I have to do in work hours or vice versa. It's a bit of both, right? So you can use your kind of work time to learn skills that are important for your role, but also as an organization, if you're in line with this philosophy, it's a case of you can also use that time to develop yourself personally as well.
No, I'm a really I'm a really big believer in that philosophy as well. I often say, like, there's three things when we're looking at learning. There's skills and things you need to do your job, so for performance on your job. There's things you can be focusing on that help with your potential to grow into your next job, and then there's things that will develop you as a whole of person. And in fact, there's tons of flow-on benefits from looking at your whole of person growth and development as well. So I really that resonates with me. Something you mentioned there, which I'd love to bring and zoom into nowadays, is what are some of those trends? So you mentioned there's trends during the pandemic. When the pandemic first hit, you kind of looked at the data and saw there's some real key themes. What is, like, if there were a couple of key learning topics that people are focusing on right now, what are you seeing at the moment? What are the kind of one or two top areas that seem to be resonating with the broader population of people?
Yeah. No, it's funny. So we have we do kind of annual reports where we look at different trending over the year. What I find always quite interesting is so we've got this sort of platform where people are accessing it all the time and searching for content. So each day at any given time, I can load up the platform and see what the most trending topics are.
That's awesome.
So if you're interested
right now,
what's
we're playing,
what the 5 top trending topics are, and I'm not going to lie to you, top 4. I don't know what most of these are.
That's so good. I love the honesty.
If you were to know anything about what OData is, that is trending right now. So is Power Yoga.
Power Yoga.
There you go.
Yeah.
Oracle Visual Builder.
Yeah.
And Microsoft AZ801.
Oh, I wonder if that's related to Microsoft Azure. Yeah, that's quite a mix there, though. Power Yoga does sound like that's not unless yoga studios are exploding across the world and people are learning how to better run Power Yoga. It doesn't sound like that's specifically related to like a business skill. Unless Power Yoga is,
Yeah, this is just dialed into our kind of public marketplace. So Udemy.com, anybody can go and buy a course on anything. Like, as I mentioned, I took a course on dog training, right?
Yeah.
But just right today, those are the kind of top 4 trending topics on our platform.
That's super interesting. The fact that you can do that as well. That's really really neat. So I guess we're kind of talking a little bit about online learning aspect, and a couple of. You always get these couple of questions. I'm sure you've heard these questions a million times, but I think they're kind of interesting questions to explore. I mean, the first one you've probably heard a million times is, people don't complete their online learning, so it's not effective. What's your view on completion as a measure of effectiveness?
I mean, this one is a delicate topic because I constantly hear around the completion metrics is sort of one of the key metrics for is this learning landing, is this good? But for me, I'm not sure if completion actually is that a good measure of success? Is it a good measure that the learning has landed, the skills have been acquired, and those skills have been put into use in order to solve whatever business problem we were looking at solving? And I think for me, the answer is no. Completion isn't. It certainly has a place in terms of one of the data sets that we can look at. I usually give the example of when another course I frequently go back to is a course on Excel, and that is a course that has, I think it's about 200 hours or something in it, a lot of content. I don't need all 200 hours of that content. I don't need to be an expert in Excel for my role, but there are certain parts of my role that require me to do spreadsheets on various different things. So if I forget how to do a pivot table, I can go into that course, I can search pivot table, jump back to that section and acquire that knowledge pretty quickly. And I then applied that in my role to solve the challenge that I was facing at the time. And that's just a small example. And that's kind of the example I typically give, is in terms of completion not being a kind of a good measure of successful learning landed.
Yeah, that's I think it's a good example. You're kind of using the course as a bit of a tapas board. So you're kind of jumping in and going, what do I need? What do I fancy right now? What's most relevant? And I'd agree as well. The most useful thing is that learning has been taken from the course and then applied into the real life, which is surely better than someone sitting there completing all 200 hours and then not doing anything back in the real world or on the job. And so then on that kind of point, you've kind of mentioned where you took the learning, applied it back onto the job pretty quickly. What kind of tips do you have then for people that have got a culture where they do, they've invested in online learning? How do we kind of take it from people doing courses online to then fostering that environment where they can take that and then put that back into practice in the real world? So let's say completion is not as important, but using the skills people learn online is. What can we do to maximize that transference of online course learning back into on the job or the real world?
Yeah, that's like, I mean, we're talking about one of the kind of the biggest challenges, not from it. I think it happens a lot more than we know about, maybe. But it's around, how do we actually tangibly track that? And I think first of all we need to understand, well, what are the business problems that we're looking to solve? We've got to get really clear on what they are, and then we've got to get really clear in terms of what data do we have access to, that we can then tangibly track or tie back the learning as kind of part of the impact on that. Because learning and acquiring skills is only ever usually going to be, one of many instruments that a business needs in order to solve a business challenge. You take the example of reducing attrition, and that's, if the number one reason for people leaving an organization is they don't have enough development opportunities, then we've got a pretty good hunch that by improving the learning culture and driving opportunities to develop would have a positive impact on that. So we just need to make sure that there are the data points in place to actually track that. So if you exit interviews or whatever it might be as your way of tracking why people are leaving and the actual attrition rate as a whole, then great. Of course, as I mentioned, that's only one part of the puzzle, right? So attrition is caused by a great number of different things. So it's around being realistic and tracking and having the data, sort of at your disposal to make sure you're measuring the impacts of learning.
Super. One thing I'm going to go kind of full circle back almost to is some of the concepts you mentioned at the start about you personally being, extroverted. You like hanging out with people, and that's traditionally one of the benefits you see of live classroom learning, whether that's kind of online, virtual, in person. You've also got it online in the kind of self-paced style, which is relatively a kind of introspective activity. How do you kind of bridge? Is there a way to bridge the two? Like, is there a way to take the courses people are doing online and kind of add a social element to them, so you're almost getting the best of both worlds? And if there is, have you got any nice stories of where you've seen that happen really well?
Yeah, I think the best approach isn't just to have instructor-led face-to-face training, or in fact to have just online learning. I think a blended learning approach is best. There are certain skill sets or certain capabilities that are better suited to being driven via online, and then there are certain skill sets that I personally find I acquire more tangible kind of knowledge that I can apply after doing kind of face-to-face or more traditional instructor-led training. But a blend of both is probably the best option, right? I heard somewhere a stat, and don't hold me accountable to this one because I don't know if I've got it completely right, but there was a stat around the amount of kind of knowledge you retain after having a kind of an in-person instructor-led kind of training session, especially if it's, you know, so let's say a 3-day kind of longer style training session on whatever topic it might be. And I think the stat's quite low. I'm not going to quote it, but I think it's around sort of 20% of the actual knowledge is retained. You can see knowledge is retained a little bit. That stat goes up when you're doing on-demand training. So typically on-demand is online, right? So you're kind of pulling out content and doing a small bit of learning or micro-learning, and you're kind of having time to digest and retain that knowledge. So I'd say that the best of both might be to have, you know, either a face-to-face sort of more traditional instructor-led training with subsequent online or on-demand training that flows up from that to kind of make sure that you're putting it in practice and can easily kind of jump back to it to kind of keep building that knowledge. Or you could do, again, you could kind of mix things up and kind of put some of the learning up front, or some up front, some as follow up. So I would say a blended approach is actually probably best.
Yeah, I like it. It sounds like you just get creative, combine things together, look at the sequencing. You can do things in a different order. But if we're kind of thinking about the learning journey and thinking about what fits in best for what the learner needs to know, both have really got their place, and you can kind of use both together. So in order to kind of, I guess, wrap up the show, I'd love to kind of bring it back to you and your own learning journey and kind of where you're looking to go from a skills development perspective over the next year or so. And I'll be interested to kind of two things, you know, what are some of the skills you're looking to focus on from a whole of person perspective, and then what are some of the skills you're looking to focus on from a workplace perspective? So what are some of the things you're looking to learn, dive deeper into, learn more about? It's obviously not poker because you smashed me, even though I've got a few. I mastered that.
Have you noticed I've slowed down the hands since I've been so far
You
ahead?
have. That's very sneaky. I should have put the timer on the hands. That was a mistake on my part.
Yeah, that's good. Good question. So, look, I think I'll give you a personal, and then actually I'll give you a professional one that's also quite interlinked with personal as well. So for me, something that might surprise you. So I'm as a kind of extrovert, and I don't mind, you know, sort of being let's say a loud voice in a group scenario. I'm also able to sit back as well, I like to think. But something I haven't done a lot of recently, and I've probably got a little bit out of practice of, is public speaking, and that's something that's going to become more and more important as we sort of get back out there. And I'm going to a few conferences myself, and then I also thought I'm getting married towards the end of the year, and I was kind of writing my speech, and I was like, oh, I've got to stand up in front of a lot of people and deliver this as well.
I've actually got to say it.
Exactly. I can't just write it down and, you know, deliver it over a Zoom screen, for example. I can't have it sort of next to me on one monitor and the people on the other. So it's something that I've kind of got a little bit out of practice of late. So I'm going to carve out some time in the next few months to kind of work on that and probably seek out some opportunities to do some public speaking where I can. So that's a professional slash there is some sort of personal element to that one as well. Personally, I'm kind of always keen to kind of learn new skills and grow. Personally, something I'm doing at the moment, I'm not sure if this really counts as learning, but I'm certainly learning a lot as I'm doing it, is I ambitiously signed up to do the Melbourne Marathon, and have quickly regressed to the half marathon, just given the time that's required. But it's a little personal thing for me. I like to set myself sort of challenges, and this one's more of a physical challenge. So I'm sort of working out how best to put a training program together at the moment, and I'm seeking a few advice from a few friends that have done that in the past. So little bit of more of a personal journey for me. Not sure it's classes as learning. We'll see at the end. See if I've learned anything over the over the however many kilometers it is.
Look, if we circle back to one of the points earlier, I think there is going to be a lot of transferable things, from training for a half marathon. How do you kind of look at something that is quite challenging and building towards it? I'm sure there's a lot of things in there about achieving goals, resilience. There's a bunch of stuff, I'm sure. It'll be really interesting to kind of touch in on that once you've done it, to see what kind of things do apply outside of the pure running environment.
Does that mean you're inviting me back? Do I get another spot in the future?
You're probably you get another. Well, as long as you lose this hand, then you'll.
Or all in on the last hand. Well, I mean, it would be silly of me because I've already won. So
yeah, this is a Hail Mary from my part.
Yeah.
You could just embarrass me. It's your chance to embarrass me by leaving me with no chips.
I'll think I'll take the win.
You're going to take the win. I'm going to go all in again. I'm going to give another Hail Mary. Right. No, you're not buying it. You're not.
Oh, it's me, isn't it? Okay. Yeah. Sorry. I thought. Okay. Here we go. Right. Yeah. Go on then. You can do what? Let's do one last Hail Mary.
One last Hail Mary. You don't have to. You can take the win.
I'm taking the win.
Yeah. I was in fact trying to bait you.
Yeah, you did well there.
Well, Davo, great to have you on. Thanks so much for sharing all your insights about building a learning culture. I think there's some really interesting examples in there, some really interesting concepts, and also well done on absolutely demolishing me on the poker front as well in front of everyone. Thanks. That makes me feel great.
Much pleasure was taken.
Marcus C, you got $150 going to the charity of your choice. So I'll kind of get onto that ASAP. So well done. Thanks so much for coming on. It's been great to have you on, and I'm obviously going to see you again really soon.
Awesome. Thanks for being a great host. It was lovely to be here.